I think Brazil has a very important role because the contest that's taking place worldwide between highly destructive and irresponsible agriculture driven by corporations, pushing GMOs, pushing chemicals, creating starvation, and the agroecological model based on biodiversity, people's knowledge, the best of science, and getting food to people, that contest is right here in Brazil. And it's a significant contest. It's not that either side has totally taken over, but there are parts of the US, for example, they don't have an alternative of a significant scale at all. And even the US will need to be rescued by examples from Brazil. I think Brazil has probably the largest proportion of the food basket committed to agroecology. A large part of it committed to not using food crops as food. And the example is sugarcane, the example is soya, which goes for animal feed and biofuel. But the fact that there is such a strong movement, beginning with biodiversity, growing into agroecology, respect for indigenous knowledge, each of these is a relevant issue around the world. And you know, Brazil is part of what they call the BRICS. I don't like BRICS, I would rather have plants. But is a strong player on the global scene right now. And how it plays will decide how others play. Unfortunately, since globalization was unleashed on the world, since treaties like the World Trade Organization became institutions, since so-called free trade, which is freedom for corporations and not for people, became the dominant paradigm, corporations are writing the rules, setting the rules, and becoming the rulers. So if you look at the intellectual property rights agreement of the World Trade Organization, it was drafted by Monsanto. And I'm not saying this, Monsanto has said this. They've said we were the patient, the diagnostician, and the physician all in one. We defined a problem, and for them, their problem was that farmers are saving seed. And the solution they offered was that saving seed should now be a crime, an intellectual property crime. And that's what the WTO rules say. But these rules were supposed to have been reviewed in '99. And every country, mine, India, Brazil, all of Central America, all of Latin America, all of Africa said, you can't patent life because life is not invented. So stop the patenting of life, stop the biopiracy. And yet, that mandatory review of 1999 hasn't allowed to be done, which shows that these corporations write the rules. And it's not just in the WTO. Monsanto wrote the Monsanto Protection Act into the Financial Act for the budget in the United States. Right now in India we are busy trying to fight another Monsanto Protection Act which would dismantle our biosafety rules and really make it free for Monsanto to push GMOs. But take the Treaty for Agriculture and Trade, the Agriculture Agreement. That is what brought Cargill to India and to Brazil. That is what made the most diverse of agriculture and society here in Brazil one giant monoculture of soybean, including illegal soybean in the Amazon. I have been taken there to see. I have seen the illegal port that Cargill had set up. The Cargill vice president was deputed to be the US representative and wrote the law on trade in agriculture. So if you look at the four facets that determine our food: seed, controlled by Monsanto through GMOs; trade controlled by Cargill, Conagra, 5 giant companies; processing controlled by 5 companies, the Nestle's, the Pepsi's; and retailing, the giant like Walmart, like Metro, would like to take retail out of the hands of small retailers in our communities and direct intimate connections between the producers of food and the eaters of food into these long-distance invisible chains in which 50% of the food gets wasted. So we do have a food dictatorship, and the reason I've come all the way to Brazil is I am deeply committed to a food freedom, because a food dictatorship is not just a dictatorship, it is the end of life. The only way to revert the situation of corporate control and corporate dictatorship over our seed and our food is to have every person play their role in reclaiming food freedom and food democracy. After all, each of us eats 2 to 3 times a day, unless you're fasting. And what we eat decides who we are. We are what we eat, how we think. Do our brains function normal? Is our body's metabolism healthy? Or because of micronutrient deficiencies, are we becoming obese? All of this affects everyone. Of course, the poor more seriously, because they are denied the right to food. But even those who can eat are not eating food. I call it anti-food, because food is supposed to nourish us. The deadly food the corporations are bringing us destroys the capacity of food to nourish us and is instead giving us disease. So each of us has to become a deep, deep, deep activist for food freedom and seed freedom in our everyday lives, which means we must support our small farmers, we must support agroecology, we must be committed to healthy eating. Surely a little carefulness today is worth it compared to getting miserably sick through careless eating in the long run. So we have to join the concerns for the planet, the ecological survival of the planet, the concerns for farmers' survival, their livelihoods. In India, we have lost 284,000 farmers to suicide because of the seed slavery instituted by the corporations. We have lost 15 million farmers from farming because of an agriculture designed to finish off the small farmer. The issue of health is part of all of this, and of course the issue of democracy. So we have to make it one issue, the issue of life on this planet and our lives as free people. I think the role of urban society in the defense of family farming is very, very high. Not because I believe that because urban areas have more wealth, they have more power, but because they have more wealth, they have more responsibility. And because they do control decision-making, both in terms of decision-making of governments, but their own decision-making in terms of buying. If they shifted their purchasing power away from the corporations to the family farmer, not only would they help the family farmer, they would help the earth and they would help their own bodies. So it makes no sense for the privileged in urban areas to be helping the corporate rule over our food. They need to be helping the family farmer. Well, you know, everything that is vital to life in every law from the beginning of history, in every culture across the world, has been recognized as lying in the commons, being the commons of society at large. And that includes the seeds, because seed is the basis of food and life. It includes water, because water is life. And it's these commons which these giant corporations would like to enclose. These are the new enclosures of the commons. Just like in England, they enclosed the land and took it away from the peasants in order to have the Industrial Revolution. Today, the giant corporations are taking over the commons of seed and biodiversity and water. So when a Nestle says it's necessary to privatize the water, they're of course thinking of the necessity of their profits to grow. They are not thinking of the necessity of aquifers to be sustained through recharge. Because corporations can only build an extractive economy. When they privatize water, they will only take water out. And that means local communities are left with no water. So it's an assault to the right to water, and even the United Nations has had to recognize that the right to water is a human right. We know what privatization of water means because Coca-Cola entered as a result of globalization. We had thrown them out in 1977 for corruption, for not paying their taxes. We don't need a Coca-Cola. But they came back with the right to investment that free trade gives. They set up a plant in a village called Plachimada. So Coca-Cola comes in and sets up a plant. On their labels they say, produced by Coca-Cola. They don't produce water. They just steal water. And within a few years, the aquifer had gone down so low that the women couldn't get drinking water. And then they leave pollution behind. Because when they pull out water for bottling, they must build up heavy metals through the reverse osmosis process that they use, which means the local water now is contaminated. And we've done studies in every plant around Coca-Cola. Everywhere there are heavy metals, very heavy metals, so the water is undrinkable. The women of Plachimada rose. They called me in 2002 to join them in their struggle, and I joined, and by 2004 they had shut that Coca-Cola plant down. And the case went to the High Court of Kerala, and the High Court ruled that water is a commons. It belongs to the community. The state does not have the right to give it to a corporation. And Coca-Cola was told to find an alternative. Of course, they can't find an alternative to water for a water business. They are now trying to enter my valley, a beautiful valley in the Himalaya called Doon Valley. And in May, this was announced, and we have started a campaign. Because water privatization by these water bottling companies means, first, the universal right to water is destroyed. The aquifer, which belongs to all, is now packaged in a 10 rupee bottle and can only be accessible to the rich, and the poor drink contaminated water. The second thing it does is it destroys water, and I do not know how long this water mining can carry on. And third is that it pollutes what little remains of clean water sources. If they really care about water, they should go clean up the polluted sources of water rather than steal the remaining clean and pure sources of water. This is water theft, and it is therefore a crime against humanity and nature. We reverse the situation by first and foremost supporting every community that struggles to keep these companies out. There is no way that I have seen where people say, come steal our water. Because not only does drinking water grow, agriculture finishes because you've got no water for agriculture, livelihoods disappear, the community gets fragmented. But I also think we need to recognize that keeping water in the commons is good for all. And this dependence on Coca-Cola, this addiction to Coca-Cola, is one of the modern day addictions. We have much healthier drinks. In fact, in India, in Navdanya, we started a whole campaign on indigenous fruit drinks, where we got grandmothers to tell the grandchildren the cold drinks they used to make. We are a tropical country. We know how to transform every fruit into a delicious drink. A raw mango drink that's wonderful to prevent heat stroke. A wonderful mixture of 7 grains that is like a full meal, and if you have that at breakfast you don't need anything more. All of these indigenous fruits and biodiversity and knowledge needs to be made stronger so that the poison drinks that Coca-Cola and company bring, and the stealing of our money and our water that corporations like Nestle bring, are put to an end. It is not just about water, it's about culture. Rights to knowledge, rights to biodiversity, rights to ecosystem, rights to water are all collective rights. And they are collective intellectual rights, because when you work with nature, you're using your mind. And nature has intelligence. I think the two very, very big aspects of violence of the Industrial Revolution was, one, declaring nature as dead, and declaring women and the third world people as having empty brains, no brains. Nature is very alive and very intelligent, as are women, as are peasants. And that intelligence is the cumulative collective innovation of our societies. So what we've done in India is, first and foremost, of course, at the level of the practice, get the confidence in people that there is this common knowledge, and therefore the common right to that knowledge and that biodiversity. Legally, I've been very fortunate to have been drawn into drafting a number of our laws as an expert, and I've always made sure that any law I touch has common rights to knowledge and biodiversity in it. The first is the Biodiversity Act, which is the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The second is a Plant Variety Protection and Farmers' Rights Act, in which we got farmers' rights enshrined for the first time in law anywhere in the world. The right of farmers to save, exchange, improve, even sell their varieties is inalienable. No law can take that away. We have managed to get this into a Tribal and Forest Rights Act, where I put in a clause on the collective cumulative rights of communities that only have a common existence. They don't see themselves as individuals and atoms. They see themselves as a collective. But we've also defended this through fighting every case of privatization, which is a case of theft. We fought the case of the theft of neem, a wonderful tree that gives us a plant-based pest control agent. And I started the campaign after the Bhopal disaster to celebrate the neem tree. I said, no more Bhopals, plant a neem, we don't need pesticides. And then they patented it. So 11 years I fought the case on the patenting of neem, and we won against the US government and one of the biggest chemical companies, W.R. Grace. Basmati, I come from the valley of Dehradun, where we grow the most beautiful aromatic rice called Basmati, which means the queen of aroma. A Texas company had patented this. We fought that case and had the patent struck down. Monsanto patented an ancient Indian wheat variety. We challenged that, and they had to drop that patent. This variety has very low gluten, so they saw it as having huge potential in a period of gluten intolerance around the world because of the industrial breeding of wheat. But I know at the end of it, the states in our times are compromised. And at the end of it, the defense of common rights will have to be through the power of common citizens. So we have created the living democracy movement, where communities declare all of their resources, all of their biodiversity, their water, their knowledge as a common property, and declare that they will not recognize any privatization, not allow any privatization of water or seeds, and they will defend this as a commons. And that movement has protected more water and more seeds and more diversity than any law can. We lived through a few decades of movements kind of building in silos, vertically, and defending their silo I protect whales and nothing else matters. I protect tigers and nothing else matters. I fight toxics and nothing else matters. I am against violence against women and nothing else matters. We have now come to the stage where these silos must be broken and be turned into bridges, connecting the issues and connecting the movements. As I have said again and again and again on violence against women, the globalization paradigm of corporate rule has accelerated the violence against women. So we need to see the connection. Feminists need to recognize they have to fight globalization and corporate rule also. They have to fight not just patriarchy, they have to fight capitalist patriarchy. That is where the power comes from. Agroecologists and peasants and family farms are, in my view, the biggest defenders of the planet. It is time for the environmental movement to recognize that the real environmentalists are the farmers who actually rebuild the soil, who actually conserve a species, who do farming in a way that the bees don't get killed, who protect waterways. And the health movement needs to recognize that the farmers are the physicians, that growing of good food is the biggest health contribution we can make. The minute we make these connections, then there's a new life, because life works through interconnection. Control works through fragmentation. And if we as movements are fragmented, we do not have power. But we as movements are interconnected, then we have all the power. And the stupidity of reductionism and mechanistic thought, the brutality and violence of this top-down domination, all becomes very clear and transparent for everyone to see. Well, I think, first of all, animals are our kin. They are part of the earth family. And just as much as we refuse to live in prisons, we should refuse to have our animals in prison. Second, animals like cows are herbivores. They were not given 4 stomachs for nothing. They were given 4 stomachs so they can graze the grass and process it gently over time. That's what their stomachs were meant for. They weren't meant to eat grain. They're being tortured by grain. They weren't meant to be injected with antibiotics. And the reason the water is so badly polluted by factory farms is because the animals are being given a diet that is not their diet. And then, of course, the craziness of the industrial system says, oh, we'll now make an enviropig through genetic engineering, reducing the phosphate a little bit in the waste that comes from the animals to have less phosphate in the water. No, all you need to do is put the animals back to the land. Let them roam free. We don't need to have so much meat in the world in any case. Even the meat eaters should eat less meat. Everyone should eat more vegetables, more fruits, more fibers. So we need a diet revolution. But most importantly, we need what I call earth democracy, to liberate the animals from these factories. If it is true that agribusiness wants to go on a 30-day strike, I think it's such a good opportunity to make Brazilians wake up to the fact that the real source of real food is the family farm, and use that 30-day strike to strengthen the relationships between the countryside and the cities. This is the time to prepare. Hold cooking classes on how to eat healthy food without huge meat diets, and to declare a common freedom for the eater, who will eat better without agribusiness, for the indigenous communities who will be saved in their ancestral rights without the aggression of this agribusiness, for the animals who will be freer if they are not in factory farms, and for the family farmer who will come to the center stage of society. I think Brazilians should be preparing now to make sure that the month of agribusiness strike is used to say, bye-bye agribusiness, we can do without you for 30 days, we can do without you forever. What happened to Native Americans in 1492 as a result of this crazy piece of paper that Columbus carried, called the letter patent, it's called a patent, to go and colonize any land in the name of the kings and queens of Europe, who were acting on behalf of the Pope, who he said was acting on behalf of God, is the basis of all colonizations that carry on today. I wrote a book called Biopiracy, in which I talked about patenting of seed and life as the second coming of Columbus, because I was looking for where did the word patent come from? And it came from Columbus's letter patent, which means the open letter, because when they were fighting wars, then they sent sealed letters in secrecy. But the declaration of taking over other people's lands was an open declaration. At the heart of this was the idea of the empty earth, terra nullius. Till then, historically, every society had seen the earth as a living mother, terra madre. And this conversion of terra madre to terra nullius continues. We got independence from colonial rulers, but the economic mindset got deepened with corporate rule through globalization. So not only is there a second coming of Columbus, recently the US and Europe have rejected the Peasant Rights Declaration in the UN Human Rights Convention on grounds that the peasant right to land and the peasant right to sea goes against the rights they see, which are rights of corporations to grab land and grab seed and biodiversity. So what happened to the Native Americans and their annihilation is continuing. And if you think of what corporate rule means, carried on those assumptions of the empty earth and now empty life, I call it bio-nullius, that there's nothing in a plant till a toxic gene is put into it. Mm-hmm. There is no intelligence. There is no life, there's no creation. And that's why a very important decision from the Indian Patent Office that just ruled against a Monsanto application, that you're just putting a gene into a plant, but the plant is making itself. That's a biological process, and biological processes are not patentable. Unfortunately, the US Supreme Court took Monsanto's claims of putting a toxic gene as making of life and upheld it in the case of Monsanto versus Bauman. So I would say if in 1492 the aggression was against the Native Americans and indigenous people, today the aggression is against all of humanity. And that's why it's not an accident that in the heart of America you see the rise of the Occupy movement, where ordinary people, educated university graduates, bank workers are saying we are the 99% and that there's a 1% ruling. So colonization has become the mode of running the economy in more violent forms, in more totalitarian forms. And if you think of the convergence of three factors in our times, first, corporate rule joining with the state, so that the state passes every law on behalf of corporations, not on behalf of its people. And democracy, therefore, has been turned from being of the people, by the people, for the people, into being of the corporations, for the corporations, by the corporations. And that is true in America, it's true in Brazil, it's true in India, it's true in every society today. And then, more recently, as movements have arisen everywhere, the movements of the indigenous people, of the peasants, of the Occupy movement, of the indignados in Spain, there is only one solution. That is to converge corporate power with state power and with military power. So what you're really seeing is a new militarized rule of the corporations emerge. It's not an accident that a Snowden shows that there is so much tapping of ordinary citizens' conversations, the surveillance state. Recently it's come out that Monsanto and Blackwater work together to chase every scientist who criticizes GMOs and every activist. This is not a free trade. It is a militarized, violent, vicious dictatorship. That's why we have to end it. Yeah. I am a vegetarian. I'm a physiological vegetarian because I don't like the smell of meat and I don't like the taste of meat. And even when I've tried a few times, I'm not happy after eating it. I mean, I haven't now for the last 30 years. But when I was studying in Canada, sometimes I had to, and I was a very unhappy person. There are some parts of the world where they don't grow vegetables. So I recognize that in Greenland, they have to eat fish. They have to eat meat. There are parts of the Amazon where eating fruit, greens and meat is part of it. But the issue is, A, the balance. That there must be a balance. And two, the respect and reverence. I do not know of a single indigenous person who does not apologize to the animal, who does not pray to the animal for forgiveness. And as long as that consciousness is there, some cultures, of course, will have some meat. But this destructive factory farming industry has no connection with the indigenous cultures that have had to eat meat because that is the food source in their area. Well, an authentically free trade would recognize the freedom of all species and therefore would not destroy species and ecosystems. An authentically free trade would recognize the rights of peasants and indigenous people and therefore would not uproot them. It would recognize the rights of small family farmers and therefore would ensure there's a fair price and no undermining of the price through dumping. An authentically free trade would be freedom for people, not freedom for corporations. What we've got in the idea of globalization is global corporate rule with a total mindlessness, mindless destruction. What we need is a planetary consciousness that is deeply aware of our interconnectedness with other species and with other cultures and all of humanity. And that's what I repeatedly talk about in Earth Democracy, that we are one planet. We share one planet as one Earth family. And that is the authentic globalization. But the awareness of being one in an Earth family means we've got to be conscious of the harm we do to others. That means we will not enlarge our footprint, we will shrink our footprint. And in food, the only way you can shrink your footprint is to shift from industrial agriculture to agroecology, shift from globalized trade to local distribution, shift from a violent system depending on corporate rule to a peaceful system dependent on community, solidarity. Now the minute you shift to that, the footprint reduces. You go from industrial global to ecological local. And while your footprint is local, your consciousness is planetary. The global corporations have no consciousness at all of the planet, of people, of life in the long run, of future generations. And that narrow-minded thinking is not worthy of being the kind of consciousness we impose on the planet. Lack of consciousness can't be the consciousness with which we live. Well, I've always said that information technology and the internet cannot be a substitute for real people and real actions. It can be an additional dimension. So if we think we're going to click a revolution into being, it won't happen unless there are people on the ground organizing. You wouldn't have had the millions come out on the streets if there weren't already some efforts that were making people conscious of what's going wrong. Some efforts pulling people together. And then a Facebook can multiply. But it cannot be the ground from which movements grow. But the very, very important aspect in these times of surveillance, where the internet itself is being privatized and militarized, is to fight for the internet as a commons, for information as a knowledge commons, so that these real-life movements on the ground, supplemented by global communications that the internet allows, can reinforce each other. Oh, there's a very, very deep connection between the violence against the earth, the violence against non-Western cultures, and the violence against women. And it all comes from the convergence of the power of a particular brand of patriarchy married to the rise and power of capital, which then, at the ultimate level, becomes the rise of corporations, because a corporation is treated as if it was a legal person. And what kind of a person it is. This legal fiction is white, capitalist, patriarchal. And it must destroy the earth, it must destroy women, it must destroy other cultures. And that is why the rights of Mother Earth, the rights of women, and the rights of all cultures is one movement to create a culture of peace, diversity, justice. Well, I have grown up in the land of Gandhi, and Gandhi always combined two things. Constructive actions to reclaim your freedom, which is why he pulled out the spinning wheel and started to spin, which is why I started to save seeds inspired by the spinning wheel. And he also did something that most people don't know. He held bonfires of British clothing. He said, as long as we continue to depend on the British for our clothing and not make our own clothing, we will be slaves. He taught us boycott. He boycotted the salt laws of the British, which is where I get inspiration to boycott every law that takes away the seed freedom of peasants, that takes away the food freedom of citizens. Not cooperating with unjust law is a duty. And this is not just individual action, it is collective action, and it's the only way societies have stayed free. I think the first internalization is the internalization of our interconnectedness with everything on the planet. And through that internalization of interconnectedness, a recognition that we carry the power of all of the planet. We carry the duty, but with it the power. And then this sense of being marginalized in a totally corrupted political and economic system. It goes, because you're part of something bigger. The only way to feed the world is to get rid of transgenic seeds. Transgenic seeds do not produce more food, so how on earth can they be a solution? They are creating more superpests and superweeds, so how can they be a solution? They are creating more control over the seed, getting farmers into debt, and the 284,000 farmers who committed suicide from 1995 when corporations got the right to take control over seed in India. And today, it's all related to seed monopolies. Are those farmers who were pushed to suicide well fed, or were they robbed of their life? No, the GMO story is one of the biggest lies of our times, and that's why we've done a report from Navdanya, which is available on our website of navdanya.org, navdanya.org. It's called The GMO Emperor Has No Clothes. I think all meetings of like-minded people form many roles. The first role is the role of solidarity. You sit around with 2,000 people and say, oh, I'm not alone thinking this way. There are 2,000 others, and they're just one part of society that could come and join here. They lead to an increase in consciousness and an increase in knowledge through the exchange. But they're also politically empowering, because they become platforms of thinking of collective action. I think the best way to fight large corporations is to make them redundant in your life. Withdraw your support to them by not consuming their products, and therefore building the alternatives from where better products come. In food, that means family farms and agroecological farms.
Ashante Meshkat,